it's being recording. So start. Hello, sir.
Hello, can you guys hear me? Okay. So this is Dr. Melody Rose, and I'm getting yeses from people, so I guess you can hear me. I'm not sure if we've lost our host or
Yeah,
not.
Professor, we can hear you. We are waiting for Dr. Darwish. I guess she got disconnected.
Okay, perfect. Well, not perfect, but at least I know that it's technical and it's not on my end. Yay.
Hello everyone. So I was just disconnected for a minute, and I guess the same has happened to Dr. Darvish. Sorry for inconvenience and that we're going to start a little bit late. Sorry, Dr. Rose. Dr. Darvish is going to join us in a minute. So if you just let us to give her some more minutes, we'll start soon. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Sorry for inconvenience. So I am on my mobile because of internet connection problem, and I continue. Can you hear me, Dr. Azadi? Is the voice okay?
Yes, it's okay. We can
Okay.
hear you.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning. And I welcome you all participants from different countries. Thanks for joining TUMS. Welcome to the third session of International Online Course on Fundamentals of Nursing Informatics. Okay, I set my video also. I should express my gratitude to all support from TUMS and all who supported us behind this program. And special thanks to our lecturers, Dr. Tanya Azadi, my colleague in TUMS, and especially Professor Tony Hebda, Dr. Melody Rose, and Professor Caroline Sipes from USA for their humble and accepting our collaboration invitation and sharing valuable knowledge. And thanks all organizations such as HIMSS, ISFTE, NI Communications, ICN, and who shared our event info. As you know, we had two sessions. First was on February 20th with subject of nursing informatics principles with Dr. Tanya Azadi, great lecture from Iran. And the other was on February 27th with subject of nursing informatics competencies and valuable lecture of Professor Tony Hebda from USA. She mentioned that the Maryland University School of Nursing started first academic program on nursing informatics from 1988, and she reviewed drivers for nursing informatics competencies and explored needed competencies as well as gaps, and discuss competency lists and assessment tools such as TANIC, SANICS, NICAT, etc. And she identified strategies to improve competency levels. We appreciate her great lecture. Um, I want to mention that if some of you participants are new and it's the first session you participate, please review recordings and slides of that of last sessions on the page of registration of TUMS website. Dear participant, please notice that you are mute and you may write any question in the chat section located in the below right panel, and our appraised to raise professional team colleagues will try to help your technical issues, and your nursing informatics questions will be answered at the end. All the sessions will be recorded and you have access in the TUMS website. Today's session will last 2 hours with a 10-minute break in between. Today, it's our honor to have this opportunity to have Dr. Melody Rose, a distinguished lecturer with DNP in nursing informatics and brilliant experiences on this field, with a topic of NI standardized terminologies and challenges and opportunities of NI. Before she starts her main lecture, you would be asked to answer 5 per lecture questions in 5 minutes. We look forward to start Dr. Melody Rose valuable lecture. Would you please start, Dr. Rose?
Hello. Do you want me to start the lecture, or you want to go ahead and start the poll?
Yes, we can start poll now.
Okay.
And then you can continue. Thank you. Please, host will be grateful. Thank you. Okay.
Do I get to take the poll?
Actually, I can't see the poll, but the poll is in progress, and I see it is mentioned there.
Do I need to share my screen?
Okay. No, it's okay. I think all participants can see the poll, and please, participants, do answer the questions. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, how many participants answered? The number of participants, if it is more than 50%, I think it's okay.
63% have voted.
Poll is closed now, Dr. Darvish.
Okay, thank you, dear Dr. Rose. Please start your lecture. Thank you so much.
Okay, and I think I'm going to go ahead and take the option to shut down my video while I do this, just like Dr. Hebda did. And you can all hear me well? So,
Yes.
Yes, please.
okay, good, thank you. So, hello everybody. Thank you for inviting me. Let me make sure I can advance my slides here. Good, yeah. I am so excited to be here. I cannot tell you how excited I am. I was excited to be here with you last week to hear Dr. Hebda lecture and all of the great questions that came as a result of her presented materials. My name is Melody Rose. I am a registered nurse, and I have a place later in this presentation that I plan on talking about my background in detail that ties in with the lecture content. For now, let me just say that I am a doctor of nursing practice, a DNP. I currently work for a major healthcare organization in clinical informatics. I've also received some questions this week that I've added into the lecture. If I do not completely answer what was asked, we can continue the discussion after I finish the slide presentations. Now, I have lectured in the traditional classroom and also in the online platform, but I've never lectured internationally through a virtual classroom. So I'm excited for the opportunities that technology has provided and the opportunity to share. Today, I've prepared 2 lectures for you. The first will be on the topic of standardized nursing languages. The second will be on the topic of nursing informatics and the relationships of infrastructure, applications, opportunities, and challenges. We can take a bit of a break between the 2 lectures as I switch around the slide presentations and also answer some questions at the end of each lecture and slide presentation. So let's get started. So here are the topics I plan on covering. I'll do a quick review of nursing informatics roles. We'll look at the DIKW model. We'll take a look at the process used for data extraction. I'll talk a little bit about why nurses document, and we will do a high-level look at the process we took to transition documentation from paper to electronic formats. And that will lead us into nursing languages. The identified objectives today are identified nursing informatics roles, identified data collection process, identify the historic path of nursing informatics, identify the path of transition for nursing documentation from paper to electronic, recognize how the nursing process is applied in electronic documentation, and identify multiple nursing languages used in electronic documentation. So last week, Dr. Hebda gave you great information about competencies for nursing informatics. My goal today is to simply remind you that the American Nurses Association, and we refer to that as the ANA, identifies entry and advanced levels of nursing informatics in the nursing informatics scope and standards of practice. I'm taking a very simplified approach to defining these roles. The entry level is informatics nurse, abbreviated IN, and the qualifications are to be a registered nurse and have an education level of associate's degree, diploma, or bachelor's degree. The advanced level is informatics nurse specialist, abbreviated INS, and the qualifications again are an RN with an education at the master's degree level and a specialty in informatics. Now you can also have a higher level of education, but the specialty comes at the MSN, the master's degree level. Now the American Nursing Credentialing Center offers a certification by exam for entry-level informatics nurses with a bachelor's degree and above. So one of the metastructures used in nursing informatics is the DIKW model. The acronym DIKW identifies data, information, knowledge, and wisdom as key components of nursing informatics. And bear with me because this is going to be, you're going to look at the slide for a minute. There's a lot of information that goes here. Originally developed in the 1980s in a healthcare setting, this concept used data, information, and knowledge only. But by the late 1980s, nursing recognized that through the application of data to information to knowledge, the use of this synthesized knowledge could be defined as wisdom. So DIK became DIKW. For nursing informatics, the model DIKW is huge. Our ability to extract data and aggregate information has increased tremendously since the late 1980s. We still have the ability to turn around information into knowledge the old-fashioned way by using our brains, our clinical judgment, and intuition. But we also have many built-in tools that help us. Have you ever heard the term clinical decision support? And you'll see that abbreviated CDS. Information systems can build in clinical decision support systems that synthesize data and that information to give us a knowledge base for decision making. And so some simple examples of that might be alerts if a medication is ordered and the patient has an allergy. That's a simple clinical decision support tool. Another example might be a lab value that is out of range and needs to be reviewed. And this example can be different levels. So a little out of range might give the end user a warning on the screen. A bigger out of range might highlight that warning on the screen. And if it's way out of range, that might require someone in the lab to actually pick up the phone and call someone. So there are many, many other great examples of clinical decision support processes. So what happens with the acquired knowledge? However that knowledge came to you, can it be interpreted as wisdom? We hope. We hope that you've taken the acquired knowledge and applied it in a way that has solved or prevented a problem, and that's where the wisdom comes in. One other aspect of the data, information, knowledge, wisdom is evolving, is the evolution in nursing informatics that I want to point out is that our ability to apply knowledge and demonstrate wisdom has gradually moved over the years from the clinical station, and that is the nursing station, to the bedside. Through technology, the tools we need that store and recall data and information are now at the bedside. Gone are the days of running for the chart. How many of you are old enough to remember depending on the written record rather than an electronic record? So let's think about a clinical scenario for a minute. You've got a patient that is a code or soon to be a code, that patient that has a sudden clinical decline. Whatever team responds, whether it's a code team or a rapid response team, or maybe your facility has some other kind of a team, the patient's recent details are available at the bedside if they have a history in the facility. Now, if that patient just came through the emergency room doors, that's probably an exclusion. But if the patient has a history of at least one shift or more, there may be a trend of information available at the bedside that could suggest a cause and recommend a course of action. So let's talk about data extraction and some of the lessons that we've learned from early builds. We now know that reporting, building a knowledge base to make decisions from, is easier to do from discrete data fields. So what is a discrete data field? And I'm sure someone is going to ask that question, so I just put it out there. A discrete data field is a defined answer. If I ask you, what is your favorite color, and give you the choices red, blue, yellow, orange, and only those colors, you have no other options. So the discrete data fields would be one of those colors. A report based off of this question might show me that 10 people answered the question and 5 said that red was their favorite. 3 said that blue was their favorite. And 2 like the color yellow, and no one really cares about the color orange. So a narrative data field, a non-discrete, is full of words. So many of, so in my question above, what is your favorite color? I would leave a blank line and you would type in your answer. Out of the 10 people, there still may be 5 that answer red, but those answers might indicate scarlet red, dark red, bright red, orange red. I had to bring orange back into the fold somehow, and then plain red. I can still pull reports from that narrative field, but it becomes much more difficult. Now, when we started building electronic documentation, especially for nurses, we tried to mimic a paper form. We learned a hard lesson from this and ended up rebuilding many documentation screens. Over the last 25 years, screen build technology has evolved significantly with so many options of pop-up screens, embedded information, linked information, triggered responses, information that pulls from different areas that we no longer even think about what old paper forms look like. Now we have talked a little bit about data collection, so let's talk about what makes a good collection. We like our discrete data fields, multiple choice, yes, no, true, false. We get great data from these types of questions. For many conversations, this type of question is perfect. If your favorite color is red, we really don't need to know the description of red, where you last saw the color, or why it's your favorite color. The answer red works. Other questions cannot be answered this way and need more descriptive style, a narrative detailed answer. These are the how does that make you feel kind of question. Describe your pain. So if someone asked me that, I might say, I have chest pain that radiates down my arm. That's a narrative type of answer. Now, I just use that as an example. There are actually screens that have chest pain radiating down my arm as part of the selection, and others that allow a provider to circle an area indicating referring pain, but you get the idea. With longer, more complicated answers, we eventually need to go into a narrative style of answer. Narrative answers can produce data points. It's more complicated to do and often harder to compare exact points of data. So in that example, chest pain that radiates down my arm, is that the same as chest pain that goes to my elbow? It's a simple example, but you still have to consider that someone has to go and look at those two answers and decide whether they're the same. Now I've got a couple of slides to show you that show different types of questions used in actual documentation screens. The first slide shows documentation about advanced directives. The first question in the top left is a single selection with multiple choices. This happens to be from a Cerner documentation screen. The round buttons, also called radio buttons, in front of the responses indicate only one choice can be made. If you move over to the top right, the response that's marked type of advanced directives, this has boxes in front of the responses. This indicates more than one selection can be made, so it's multiple selection. If you move to the middle of the screen on the left side, the box that says healthcare agent or power of attorney name, this is a free text box, so the end user can enter anything they want in this box. And if you move to the right side of the screen, this is another single selection radio button, multiple choice, but only one selection. Now, the three questions across the bottom of the screen are all technically multiple choice selections because of the radio buttons, but they are also yes/no style because there's only two selections. You get to choose yes or no. And we also build true/false questions the same way if we happen to use that style of question. The next screenshot is also from a Cerner screen, and it represents a different style of documentation. This type of documentation is designed to look more like a spreadsheet than a form. The nurse clicks on the documentation band, and in this case, I've used the Braden Skin Integrity documentation, and this opens a response box for each item with a mouse click. The screenshot shows an open response box with a selection identified. If the user clicks something and changes their mind, they click again to deselect. So why do nurses document? So we document because of the nursing process. The nursing process is to assess, to diagnose, and we're talking about a nursing diagnosis here. Then we identify a goal, and we usually call that an outcome. We plan, and that's a nursing care plan. We implement the plan, and those are interventions, and then we evaluate. And that's presenting the evidence of this through documentation, and then we start the whole process over. So you might say we did this, the nursing process, long before nursing informatics evolved. So let's talk about how the nursing process fits into nursing informatics. And this starts us through the historical path of nursing informatics. So we made a transition from paper to electronic documentation. And I mentioned earlier that as we started building electronic forms, we tried to mimic paper forms. What I did not say is that much of the documentation was narrative. At the start of a shift, a nurse would start with a blank template, which was mostly a piece of paper that might have had a few pre-formatted areas for vital signs, lung sounds, maybe a few other areas if you were in an OB or an ICU setting, and everything else was written by hand. Different units had more detailed levels of templates. Intensive care units loved their trifold notes. Converting some of these areas to electronic documentation was difficult, and has taken specialty modules with in-depth look at practices. Some of these areas are OB, ED, and surgery. But we've done it. It's taken a lot of time, but we've done it. We've gotten smarter, and when I say we, I mean the developers of the software. It's been a battle. The first few generations, we had programmers that had no clinical understanding, and this is when nurses became involved, and that's when nursing informatics became leaders in clinical informatics processes. Once the software became more clinically friendly, we were able to move from the clinical stations, the nursing stations, for documentation into the point of care documentation at the bedside. In those early days of my nursing career, and I'm talking pre-computer, I might have had an assignment of 10 patients for an overnight shift. At the end of the shift, I surely did not have time to document all of the work I had done, but there I was sitting in a chair with all of my patient documentation papers, a few paper towels I had scribbled notes on, some alcohol swabs that I had vital signs on, trying to make sense out of all of my notes. Point of care documentation was not an option then, but it might have made a difference. And hopefully it does in today's busy work environment. Now, don't get me wrong, electronic documentation does not take away a bad shift. The nurse will still grab a paper towel now and then to scribble on, but there are many more options for documentation today. Plus, no one is going to come take the chart away from you while you're trying to finish up documentation because it's electronic. One other thing I want to mention here is the dependency on hardware. Make sure there is enough hardware, that's laptops, computers on wheels, PCs, whatever your facility uses to document for everyone. And I'll talk about this more in the next lecture. So a little bit about the strategy of nursing languages in general. We are here, that is, nurses are here for our patients. We give better care if we communicate better. Using a recognized nursing language helps us communicate better. We can also collect a higher quality of data, which will give us better reporting and better analytical data. If we are all speaking the same language, it is easier to identify problems and questions that can be researched and improved. This leads us to evidence-based practice. Ultimately, there is the potential that nursing care could be something more than just room and board. Can we validate that nursing care is a chargeable service? Possibly. Is that going to happen today? Not today, maybe tomorrow. So let's look at some of the standardized nursing languages used today. One of the most widely known and used began as the North American Nursing Diagnosis Association, and we abbreviate that as NANDA. And then it became NANDA International, and we still abbreviate that NANDA. Thank you. I don't have to memorize another acronym. NANDA can be tracked back into the 1970s, but we didn't really start using it until the 1980s. and NANDA are nursing diagnoses only. There are 13 domains, and we'll go over these in a minute, and we'll build a quick nursing care plan. We also have nursing outcomes classifications, known as NOC, and these evaluate the effects of nursing care. There are 7 domains. We have nursing intervention classifications. These are NIC, and this describes the activities that nurses do, and there are 7 domains. So NANDA, NOC, and NIC, or NIC and NOC, whichever way you prefer, were originally independent classifications. They can still be used individually, but most commonly, they are used together as one common system of communication. This fits in the nursing process between assess and evaluate. So we assess, we diagnose, which is NANDA, we identify a goal, which is NOC, we plan, which is our nursing care plan, we implement using NIC, and then we evaluate. All right, there are 13 domains in NANDA nursing diagnoses, and I have these on the next 2 slides. I'm just going to briefly read through them. We have, starting with domain 1, we have health promotion, nutrition, elimination, exchange, activity, rest, perception, cognition, self-perception, role relationship, sexuality, coping, stress tolerance, life principles, safety protection, comfort, and growth development. When we assess the patient, we look at the total picture and create a care plan that is comprehensive in any and all domains that apply. Today, we're just going to build a very quick and not so detailed plan of care in one domain, just to get an idea of how this works. So our patient is an 85-year-old female. She's frail. She lives alone. She has chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, also known as COPD. She has chronic pain, also known as fibromyalgia. She has heart disease, a pacemaker. She takes 12 prescription medications plus multiple over-the-counter medications known as polydrug. So we've got a lot to work with here. And today we're simply going to look at domain 1, health promotion, health awareness, and health management. And I'm going to assign risk for falls. Do we all agree that this is appropriate nursing diagnosis for the patient? Okay, and by the way, you've all just met my mother. She is our patient, and I have to admit that I need to change this slide because yesterday was her birthday and she is now 85. So happy birthday, Mom. So now we need to look at outcomes or goals. And I like to see what I'm aiming at, so I do the outcomes. What's the end game? And we have 7 different nursing outcome classifications to choose from. But staying with the nursing diagnosis theme of health promotions, we're going to stay simple and go with domain 1, functional health. Within the nursing outcomes, there are a moving number of classifications that are assigned, and it depends on where you look. I've found different reference resources that tell me different numbers, and today I'm going to go with 31 to 37 measurable classes. So again, with NANDA diagnosis, domain 1, health promotion, health awareness, health management, risk for falls. NOC, domain 1, functional health. We now need to add a class, and I'm going to add mobility because I know that is a problem for her. And we're going to put some outcomes. So outcomes and goals need to be measurable. So words count here, and I've defined or identified 5 outcomes, and let's see if all 5 are measurable. So the first one, patient will not fall while in the hospital. Can we measure this? I believe we can. The second one, patient will verbalize the need to use safety measures to prevent falls. And I think we can measure this because she's either going to say, I need to know, I know I need to ask for help. Now, that doesn't mean she's always going to do it, but if she verbalizes that, yes, that's measurable. The third one, the patient will demonstrate fall prevention measures, and I believe this is measurable too. If she actually uses those little slippers that we give them that have the treads on the bottom and uses the commode that we put at the bedside. The fourth one, patient will understand the risk of for fall at the home. And I don't believe this is measurable, because how do we measure understanding? So on this one, I would change the wording around to something that's measurable. And then the fifth one, identify and implement strategies to increase safety and prevent falls at home. And I took a little bit of liberty with this because we're only doing one domain here. I would have put this in a different place if I were making a bigger care plan, but I wanted to include a couple of things. So yes, I believe this is measurable. So the point here is that outcomes can definitely be measured. Yes, no. Others might have to be put on a scale of accomplishment. And we usually use a Likert scale, with 1 being the lowest level and 5 being the highest level of accomplishment. So now we need to assign interventions or actions that will accomplish the outcomes. An intervention is any treatment based on the professional clinical judgment and knowledge that a nurse performs to enhance the patient's outcome. This is an area that nursing has fallen down on the job with documentation historically. We have not always documented the interventions that we do. I mean, who has time? But nursing intervention classifications, NIC, has 7 domains, and they're listed here. There are approximately 542 identified interventions, so take credit for what you do. So now we go through each nursing outcome and assign appropriate interventions that are measurable to them. The interventions are the tasks that document the achievements or not of the outcome. And so we go through each one of these outcomes and look at the interventions that are assigned. So in the first outcome, the patient will not fall in the hospital. How do we do this? The first intervention, I'm going to place fall risk program in place. The second one, patient education with a verbal return of instruction, and it's that verbal return of instruction that is measurable. I will place a bedside commode if appropriate. Bedside rails up, call light within reach. Bedside in lowest position, staff responds to call light as soon as possible, and each one of those are tied back to a domain. Please don't let the list of limit interventions. Fit your creative interventions into the existing interventions as needed. So take credit for the interventions that are done. It doesn't mean you get to create interventions that aren't on the list. Just make sure that if you're creative in the things that you do, you take credit for it. The next 2 interventions, patient will verbalize the need to use safety measures. I've put patient education will verbalize return of instructions and respond, and staff will respond to the call light. The next one, patient will demonstrate fall prevention measures, and you can see the 4 interventions I've added here. And you can also see that some of these interventions are multi-duty interventions. You're going to see them under multiple outcomes. And here's my last slide on this. And you can see that I have 2 outcomes for these 4 interventions. Again, they're multi-duty interventions, but I wanted to pay attention to this one in particular because there are a couple of things in here. This is going to bridge the patient into the home setting. We don't have rugs, remove all rugs. We don't have rugs in the hospital, but this is referring to safety and family. And this is how we actually work the family into the plan of care. Now, again, this is a simple plan of care. I would have put this in a different place, but for the sake of this high-level overview, this is where I put it. Okay, so this slide is just a a demonstration of the Nanda, Nock, and Nick linkage through SNOMED CT mapping. And SNOMED CT is one of the reference terminologies that's recognized as a standardized nursing language. The acronym SNOMED CT stands for Systematized Nomenclature of Medicine Clinical Terms. Full integration of standardized nursing languages into SNOMED CT is a huge accomplishment. SNOMED CT is one of the critical languages that the electronic health record vendors must use to meet EHR incentive program requirements in the United States. At this time, nursing and nursing care is accounted for in room charges. There's been no way to account for our time and work effort, with detailed levels of work accountability through mapping of nursing diagnosis, outcome, and interventions linked through standardized reference languages. Nursing can now identify the contributions made in detail at the patient care level. Again, does this mean nursing care becomes a chargeable item? Not today, but the path is set. It could be. So let's do a quick review of the events that led us to the transition into electronic health record, or the EHR, as we often call it. So movement to the EHR was a catalyst for transitioning paper documentation to electronic documentation and the need to define standardized nursing terminologies. Going back to 1973, nursing leaders got together and identified the need for defined nursing diagnosis. And this is how NANDA started to develop. At the same time, another type of standardized language was being developed for non-hospital settings, such as home health, public health, school health, hospice, prisons, and this was the Omaha system. And it was officially recognized by the ANA in 1992 as a standardized language. In 1977, the Nursing Minimum Data Set, known as NMDS, was identified as a standard for what needs to be documented. So NMDS tells us what components the documentation needs to include, things like nursing diagnosis, outcomes, interventions. In 1986, the ANA recognized and promoted computer technology for nurses, and this was huge. In the United States, many facilities were still completely on paper or in the process of starting to convert to computer systems. Typically, first systems to be converted would be the patient registration. So a patient would be electronically put into a system, but it did not go anywhere other than an electronic roster. Eventually, this system would go into building a record-keeping system, and then clinical systems were the last systems to become electronic. In 1990, the NMDS system was officially recommended by the ANA as a standardized language, and the recommendation identifies that NMDS be used as an essential minimum standard for nursing information for any electronic patient record system. Now, there are 16 elements required in the United States, and that includes 5 patient demographic points, nursing diagnosis, nursing outcomes, nursing interventions, intensity of nursing care, disposition point, payer information, and multiple numeral patient identifiers, things like medical record numbers and encounter numbers. Now, in 1991, nursing informatics became a subspecialty of nursing at the master's level, recognized by the ANA. In 1991, also, the clinical care classification system was developed. And I'm going to talk about clinical care classification, or CCC, in a minute. And then in 2004, the Office of the National Coordinator, the ONC, was established in the United States. And this is the office that oversees health information technology. In 2006, President George W. Bush signed an executive order paving the way for health information technology. In 2007, CCC was approved by the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services as meeting an interoperability standard for the exchange of information in the EHR system. In 2008, the ANA published the first edition of the Scope and Standards of Practice in Nursing Informatics. And this is a landmark for us. In 2009, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act and the Health Information Technology and Economic and Clinical Health Act, thank goodness that one has an acronym, the High Tech Act, were approved. In 2011, the meaningful use stage 1 criteria, which is incentivized, that means they get money for that, came into play, and that criteria is all about data capture. In 2014, the stage 2 criteria became incentivized, and that's about advanced clinical practice. And I'm going to skip down here to 2018 because that's meaningful use stage 3 criteria. And that is about promoting interoperability, and we're still working on this. As a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, I was on a meeting about meaningful use stage 3. And then I'm going to skip back here to 2015 because that's when the ANA published the second edition of the scope and standards of practice for nursing informatics. And then we jump up to 2021, this year, the ANA is about to publish the third edition of the scope and standards of practice for nursing informatics. So that was a very quick and high-level rundown of the historic path that led the United States to the EHR and promoted the transition of paper to electronic documentation. So let's move into clinical care classification system now. So CCC was developed by Dr. Virginia Saba and her staff at Georgetown University School of Nursing. And I'm very pleased to tell you that I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Saba in 2018. She's very sweet. She's a very humble lady. She's about the size of a twig. And she embraces nursing and she loves nursing students. CCC was developed in 1991 and identified in 2007 as the first nursing language to meet the interoperability standard of electronic health records. CCC was developed with the 6-step nursing approach in mind. Remember, that's assess, diagnose, identify a goal, plan, implement, and evaluate. Keeping this in mind, CCC was developed using live patient data. And when I say live, I mean the data was washed. There was no identifiable data to specific patient, but it was still live. Everyday use, it was situational data and used in the development of the system. The nursing diagnoses and outcomes are developed together, and then they're linked to interventions. And remember, NAND, NOC, and NIC are all separate entities that are kind of smushed together. The CCC facilitates point of care documentation or documentation at the bedside. CCC is also linked through SNOMED CT mapping, and CCC is offered free to anybody that wants to use it as long as permission is given. And you can get permission from sabacare.com. Just go online and have a conversation with those folks. And that was actually one of the reasons that I talked to Dr. Saba in 2018. When I met her, I was working in a university and I was trying to introduce electronic care planning into the bachelor program that I was working in. The system that was being used was inefficient and not well received. Many instructors were simply overlooking the importance and the value of care planning. So Dr. Saba was encouraging about using the CCC system and wanted me to reach out to the Saba Care and talk about it. One of the ways I wanted to do this was implement the CCC system into the skills lab that we were using so that the students would take their clinical patient that they had that week to the skills lab and do their online documentation on a computer patient and document in the CCC system. So let's look at the hierarchical framework that CCC is built on. There are 4 identified healthcare patterns. These are health behavior, psychological, functional, and physiological. Under each healthcare pattern are care components, and there are a total of 21 care components. Under health behaviors, we have medication, safety, and health behaviors, Under psychological, we have cognitive, neuro, coping, role relationship, and self-content. Under functional, we have activity, fluid volume, nutritional, and self-care. And under physiological, we have cardiac, skin integrity, bowel, gastric, urinary, metabolic, respiratory, physical regulation, life cycle, and tissue perfusion. Now this screen is more of a visual of the hierarchy. It shows the 4 healthcare patterns on top, then the care components, there's 21 of them. And these are associated with nursing diagnoses. There are 176 nursing diagnoses, and these are also associated with outcomes. And the outcomes have 3 qualifiers. The outcomes are either going to be improve, stabilize, or remain the same, or die. And we're just going to call that deteriorate. So improve, stabilize, or deteriorate. And then following the nursing diagnosis outcomes are the interventions, and there's 804 of them. And there are 4 types of interventions. There's assess, monitor, perform, direct, care, teach, educate, manage, refer. So the CCC linkage, just like Nanda, NOC, and NIC, CCC is mapped to SNOMED CT codes. CCC is also recognized by the International Organization for Standardized Technology Committee, Health Informatics, and thank goodness that has a simple abbreviation of ISO. So looking at CCC and the data extraction triggers, I've just done a really high-level example here. Nursing diagnosis by care components have letter indicators. So as an example, I've used respiratory, and the letter indicator is L. I've used the nursing diagnosis code for respiratory alteration, and that's 26.0. So adding those 2 together, the diagnosis is L26.0. Then the nursing outcomes by major category. Remember the categories, outcomes are qualified by improve, stabilize, or deteriorate. You add 1 digit. You add 1 for improve, 2 for stabilize, or 3 for deteriorate. In this situation, I want to stabilize, so the diagnosis became L26.0.2 for stabilize. So now we need to add nursing interventions. And the nursing interventions, remember, there are 4 types: assess, monitor, perform, direct care, teach, educate, manage, refer. So I chose an intervention cluster, implementation, perform, pulmonary care, and the code for this is L36.0.2. And within this cluster, I chose 2 interventions: breathing exercises and inhalation therapy, L36.1 and L36.3. So once we have had a chance to perform the interventions and reassess the patient, we go back to the outcome and reevaluate, and this patient remains stable, and that is L26.0.2. And so that evidence, now what you see on the screen, the coding, the L26 dot whatever, the nurses are never going to see this. This is all background mapping. So I just put this on the screen for you. The nurse doesn't have to document any of this when they document their interventions. This all works in the background, but they do have to document the interventions. They have to document whether the patient is taking their inhalation therapy, doing their breathing exercises, they're coughing, they're walking, or they're not walking. That all the documentation has to be done. That's the only thing the nurse has to do. All right, there are multiple recognized nursing languages. There are at least 12 standardized nursing terminologies recognized by the ANA. And these are categorized into 3 types. We have interface, minimum data sets, and reference terminologies. And we've talked about a lot of these languages, but this slide and the next slide is where I make meeting the objectives official. In no particular order other than these fit on the slides this way, the best. There are 3 reference terminologies. I've already talked about SNOMED CT, through much of this lecture, and this is one of the reference terminologies that vendors have used to demonstrate compliance in the United States with EHR incentive reimbursement programs, because it's all about the money, finance and money. If you can't get paid for it, then you might as well not do it. Another reference code is LOINC, Logical Observation Identifiers Names Codes. This is a common reference terminology used in labs, laboratory systems. And then we have ABC codes. This is alternative billing codes, and it's used in alternative medicine, nursing, and other integrative healthcare interventions. We have minimum data sets, and I talked about nursing minimum data sets in MDS and the impact it had when we went over the historical journey of transition to electronic documentation. Now, NMDS has a friend. It's in MMDS, that's nursing management minimum data sets, and that includes a component for financial applications. And then moving on to the interface terminologies, there are 8 of them, and we've talked about 4 of them in detail. In addition to NANDA, NOC, NIC, and CCC, I briefly mentioned the Omaha system as one of the early developed nursing languages. It was developed for out-of-facility, home health, public health, school health, hospice, prison. There's also International Classification for Nursing Practice, ICNP. It's a newer standardized language. It was developed in Geneva, Switzerland, starting around 2009. It's designed to meet the needs of documentation in EHRs. Then we have perioperative nursing data sets, and that's abbreviated PNDS. It's developed by the Association of Perioperative Registered Nursing, or nurses, sorry, AORN, specified to surgical area needs. And then there are a couple of non-nursing terminologies I want to mention that are important to know. HL7 codes or health level 7 codes are used for many different electronic transactions. Some you might be familiar with are ADT, admission, discharge, transfers, and then billing information. Those are 2 important HL7 influences. CPT codes are current procedural terminology codes, and they describe medical, surgical, and diagnostic services at the provider level, and these are done at the outpatient level status. And then ICD-10, International Classification of Diseases, 10th revision, and they again describe medical, surgical, and diagnostic services at the provider level for the inpatient. Now, my description of CPT and ICD-10 is similar and very small. They do much more. But my point in mentioning them is that when nursing care enters the EHR through SNOMED codes, when the time comes to reconcile nursing care financially, SNOMED codes will translate to financial codes of CPT and ICD-10. As a matter of fact, that already takes place. If a nurse lists a nursing diagnosis as a problem, the provider can convert that problem to a medical diagnosis, and charges can be documented against it. So that's the end of this slide presentation. Do you have questions for me?
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Melody Rose. It was wonderful, and I think some questions from first session and last week also you could answer with your presentation. And I mentioned some of our participants, like I think there was Dorota asked, or Hamida asked about the financial problem of using computers with nurses. And now I can mention that if nurses be able to document the details of their nursing process, then it can support their financial problem also, and it can improve health care and the outcome of nursing care, because we have many data and we can actually analyze them, use them for modeling, for actually simulation, and then we can use them for reform our nursing plan or care in the future. These are only some parts, and if any of participants have more questions, please ask. Dr. Rose will guide you and will answer. And thank you. And you can raise your hand if someone wants to speak, or you can just write in the chat box. One question was about ICNP. Okay, Hamida, let's go.
Thank you very much, Dr. Darwish. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Melody Rose, for this very hard lecture. I have a question. I am interested to know that this NANDA and NIC and NIO, the nurses in US, they actually and really they use in their practice daily in the hospital and documented their diagnosis and intervention according this classification, or just these systems used for this language for use for teaching the nursing student to know about that. This is interesting to me to know about that, because it's very difficult and we couldn't to implement in real practice.
It's a good question. So Nanda, NOC, and NIC and CCC are methods of nursing, and that's how we teach. And the nursing students are taught to assess, diagnose, come up with a plan, set your outcome plan, and put interventions, and then evaluate. We like to think that the generalization of skill set goes over into the hospital, and that's exactly how they practice. The electronic systems are set up so that the nurse can do that. Do they actually do that? I would like to say yes, but I cannot guarantee that. Systems like CCC will do that for you because of the way it's built in the background. NANDA, NOC, and NIC can be built like that. That doesn't mean that it is built like that, depending on the system that it's built in. It's kind of like installing backwards, retrofitting into the system. But the interventions are all there. And we're going to do charging when the time comes. We will do charging off of the interventions that the nurse does. So if you're walking a patient and you document that, it's going to be available and documented on a chart, so that someone that's doing a chart review will see that the nurse did the walking of the patient, that they inserted a Foley catheter, they took the Foley catheter out, what the time frame was. They hung an IV, they stopped the IV infused. All of those are interventions, and they are documented. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I want to actually say that once or for 1 minute, I went to bring the book of Professor Virginia Saba, and I couldn't hear the last sentence of you, sorry. Because someone asked about to introduce a book for CCC. So I wanted to introduce this book. This is the Nursing Informatics books for Professor Virginia Saba, which I have, and this is for 2011, and I know the new version is published 2021. And I recommend you to study this book for CCC, and also you can go to the website of the sabacare.com. Yes, thank you.
It was underneath my computer. It's holding my computer up higher.
Yes, and also I studied more books. Yes, very nice. This is the new version?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And this is for Tony Hebda, Professor Tony Hebda, who was our last session lecturer, and this is also is used in the universities for teaching. And another one from Professor Marion Ball. These are my beloved books. And I have always with me. And I studied all of them. So please, Hamida, I couldn't get your question. If I should answer something, please repeat it because I went to bring the books.
Okay, my question was that if Nanda and NIO and NIC and CCC, it is practically the US nurses, they use in the hospital in their documentation in real practice or not? And also I can ask the same from you for nurses in Iran. Dr. Darwish, I think disconnected again.
But, okay, I am in a weak connection, sorry. I found your question, okay. In Iran, we have a big gap for this. We don't have documentation, electronic documentation for NANDA, NIC, and NOC, or a sort of CCC or NNN. And it causes many problems. And one of our goal for providing such a course, and after that our decision, our university decision to establish MSc for nursing informatics is such gaps we have, because the nurses, first of all, nurses should be aware of standardized terminologies of nursing and what are the linkages between them. Then they can ask the informaticians for providing systems and adding such systems, documentation system for nurses to our HIS. We have HIS, okay? We have many different parts of HIS, but the nursing documentation is so weak in Iran. That's why we have so many problems. And if we have this part and add them to our HIS, then for nurses, actually we have details of their nursing care. And that can help to manage financial and manage if we need some new nurses or more nurses, or we can change the model of nursing care and many things by this data. I don't know, could I answer you or
yes.
not?
Thank you, Dr. Darwish. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, if anyone has questions, some questions they sent in the chat box and I sent by LinkedIn to Professor Dr. Rose. And can you see Dr. Rose? Can you look at the chat box?
Oh.
If you can't, I send the others also to your LinkedIn.
Mr. Omar also raised his hand.
Okay, we can hear you, Mr. Omar. Husk, please. Okay, continue.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Melody Rose. Thank you, Tehran University of Medical Science School of Nursing. Also, my question is concerned about the NANDA, NOC, CCC, and NNN. Which kind of challenges, please, Dr. Rose, you have had or you faced at the time of translating or adopting these kind of systems into practice? And thank you.
The barriers that we've had, make sure I'm on. Yeah, the barriers that we've had were early, and that was just getting people to use it. Once we had the financial oomph from the country, the legislation for ERA, the American Recovery and Reformation Act, that said we needed to go to an electronic health record and that payment to the hospitals was going to be tied to documentation, the barriers went away. So when it was incentivized and payment was tied to it, all barriers went away. It's all about the money.
And I think Dr. Rose has experience in any company like Cerner or some others. Would
Yeah.
you please share your experience about them to Omer and the other participants?
Well, that's in the next lecture.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
I think it is precious for this question.
Let's see. Isn't this task committee? Hold on.
If you can, yes, there are some questions.
Certification. Okay, I hope that, is there any program of certification, MSc or PhD in TUMS? That's for you. Throughout Ghana, I don't know that one. Valuable session. Let's see. Okay, so I think most of these look like they
I think Dr. Banaki is written something about that in Iran, in a hospital, we have Ananda and NIC and CCC. Would you please speak, Dr. Banaki? Can you explain if I got it right? You were talking about this is in one hospital, or your question is that nurses can do design this system or not? Can you explain, Dr. Rose? Nurses after studying MSc nursing informatics, do they design a system, or what is their job? Is their job designing a system for CCC or not? Or they should only
well,
ask
CCC
IT man?
CCC was designed by nurses.
Okay.
So that is a great system. That's in all of, I don't work for HCA. That's not the company I work for. But HCA has installed CCC throughout all of their hospitals. That is a working system that they are collecting data for. There are other hospitals that also have that system installed. So that is a system, as an example, that has been designed by nurses, is used by nurses, and is collecting data points that can be put into charges for, or let's see, make a database that nursing care can be evaluated on.
Okay, you mean they can do design it theoretically or practical? I mean, the infrastructure should be ready by nurses or by the company, by the IT man, the infrastructure in the system.
So if I were to think about designing something, it would take a lot of money to do that and to put that out into a hospital. That would be beyond my financial means. I would have to work for someplace or a university. And honestly, I wouldn't do that because there's many good products out there. I would go work for someplace and take an existing product and improve that.
Okay, but in Iran we don't have. So the companies should prepare that in the hospitals, then nurses can give
Okay.
their opinion about refine it or change it or some problem. Yes?
Okay, so in Iran, if you don't have that, I would start with the nurses and let them design it with the clinical workflow as a factor. And,
Yes.
and I would look at CCC as guidance because that
Okay.
system works very well. I would also look and see how that works with your process workflow. And that's one thing in my next lecture that I'm just going to drill about process workflow. How does your work fit? You
Yes.
always have to look at that.
So they should model their nursing care about this CCC on a paper and ask the company to design a real system and attach to their HIS. Yes?
That would be one way to do it. Yes.
One way to do
Mhm.
it.
But
Okay.
you definitely have
For
to have.
starting, I think it's the best. For starting, I think it's the best.
Yeah.
Yes?
You have to have a clinical hand in designing any software because you have to know
Yes.
what the workflow process is.
Yes. You mean the nurses and those IT men should do it together.
They have to work together.
You mean that? Yes?
Yes. Yes.
Work together to
Yes.
prepare such system. Thank you so much.
Uh-huh.
And I think, yes, I think if anyone has question and if dear host, if you see someone hands raised, please do unmute. Otherwise, we can have a 10-minute break. And in this break, dear Dr. Rose can read the questions and do answer in brief after the break. Agree?
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. Dear participants, I invite you to have a break, and in this break, I think our host prepared an introduction and welcome to TUMS video. It's a very short video for you. Enjoy that. Thank you. See you after 10 minutes.
Hello, I'm TUMS. Warmest congratulations on your acceptance to Tehran University of Medical Sciences. TUMS schools are ready to start a new academic semester after a big change due to the world pandemic. It's our honor to have you in our educational community. The Education Office for International Students will be your partner in your quest to reach your academic and personal goals. Attention! Your online classes for all levels will start in mid-February 2021. Hope to see you in person as soon as possible in Tehran. Hello, I'm TUMS. I'm going to show you how to register at TUMS after you receive your acceptance letter. We have seen many changes in various areas of life. The higher education is no exception. The educational environment is no longer limited to the campus area. We offer two options for all international students, online or on-campus classes. You need to contact the registration office and inform us how you prefer to start your course. You can all start your course online. We will check all the needed documents in your dashboard. After that, you will fill out a personal information form and a commitment letter. You can pay your tuition either through your representative or TUMS official agent in Iran or through the payment methods that will be announced by TUMS Financial Affairs. You will start your study at home through TUMS online platform. Materials include online videos, PDF, PowerPoint, voice messages, etc. Homework and exams are available at the system as well. You will be introduced to Educational Affairs to receive your student ID number. Congratulations, you are a TUMS student now. For on campus, here is the procedure. The most important thing is to apply for an entry visa through your dashboard. Please check out our next video on the visa process. After receiving your education visa or having transportation from the airport to the TUMS, please send us your flight ticket at least 5 days earlier than your arrival. A day after your arrival, we will meet each other at the registration office. Just do not forget to bring these documents with you to the office. Congratulations, you are a TUMS student now. See you soon at TUMS.
Would you like to feel history, eminence, and cultural diversity in one place beside your academic experience? So, follow my story. Tehran University of Medical Sciences is the most highly ranked medical university of Iran, one of top-ranked universities on Shanghai and QS ranking as well. TUMS is a city of science with a history over 100 years, being pioneer in clinical and scientific fields based on a large number of developers, scholars, clinicians, and students have made it a distinguished center with a notable reputation in the region and Central Asia. Our campus doors are open to international students from all cultures and backgrounds. To provide equal opportunities for talented students, exceptional offers including scholarships and financial assistance are available. After graduation, you will return to your country and will start to practice, research, or teach. Outstanding and passionate faculty members are our assets to have qualified curriculum and educational system. Meet the opportunity for a new academic experience in an amazing university in wonderful Iran. To do so, take the step to apply for TUMS. Now the admission is open. Don't hesitate to act for a better future. We can't wait to see you here.
Okay, I think Dr. Rose, are you ready for starting next session? If you have any answer, conclusion for the questions we can hear, then you can start your next session if you are ready.
I do have, I was able to pick out a couple of questions. Let's see. I think we did talk about design of IT systems. Someone had asked about whether the design was by nursing or by IT. And you talked about that. And that should be a collaboration between nursing and IT. You were right about that. Someone else had mentioned the nursing process as the backbone. And that is correct, at least in my opinion. Nursing is, the nursing process is the backbone because that is so cyclical. The assess, the diagnosis, place a goal and plan, and then do your outcomes and evaluate. That is just so classic. Someone had put the comment that nursing bedside nurses are not concerned in with billing, and that's I think that comment was related to the United States nurses, and that is absolutely correct. They're not taught that way, and that was one thing that I had actually talked about in when I taught at the bachelor's level, and they should be. At the bachelor's level, they're not taught about billing and about the cost. That doesn't come in until a nurse goes for their advanced degrees, because that's when they think about administration and how you pay for things. And that's not right, because in order for us to stay solvent, hospitals have to be run like a business. And that's the other thing that has changed when we talk about barriers and bringing in the electronic health record. It's all about money. Well, we have to run hospitals and healthcare as a business, because we have to be able to pay for the services that we give so that we can continue to offer those services. So even at the level of housekeeping, plant operations, ancillaries, nursing, we have to be conscious of the money that we are spending and saving. And that has to be house-wide. Otherwise, we won't be able to offer those benefits, the benefit of having a community hospital, or even a hospital in a rural area to service people. So that needs to be implemented at the bachelor's degree level, or the beginning, the entry level of hospital, of nursing. So that was my comment. And I will, if you're ready for me, I can go ahead and start the next lecture.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. The question I wanted to ask is, to what extent do you think that nurses should have involvement in the development of the hospital IT system to enable them have full control of the system so they can do their documentation very well? Because over here in Ghana, what we have realized is that there is this system called the e-health, or the LIMS, where it was, or it's been a government project where the government has authorized some IT firms to develop the system for the e-health electronic record system for the hospitals. And nurses actually had little contribution with regards to the development of some of this. And because of this, it has posed a lot of problems for the nurses in terms of some of the parameters. For instance, in the ICU, we wanted parameters like GCS, Glasgow Coma Scale, to be included, but this was left out. And so it has been a problem. So to what extent do you think nurses should have involvement when it comes to the development of the e-system?
I think you bring up a great question. So I think you almost have to have a 1-to-1 ratio of builders to clinicians, because the builders, or the non-clinical people that actually put the system together, don't have a clue of what the clinicians do. So what a builder thinks a clinician needs to document is unrealistic until they actually follow a clinician around and see what they do. And one of my favorite things that I used to do when I worked for a different company, I would bring customer support into the hospital, and I would let them follow a nurse around for just a couple of hours, because that's really all they could tolerate. They were not healthcare. They were not used to being at the bedside, but they all of a sudden understood why we had to have documentation like vital signs at this point in the documentation, because that's where the clinician was. So I believe that it's a one-on-one situation where you, or 50-50. You have to have full implementation of clinical people with builders in order to get a valid system. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Now, the other side of that is, as a clinician, I want this system to do everything for me. Not only do I want it to pull information, but I want it to sign my name, and I just want to sit there and let it do that. Well, that's not realistic either. So we have to have collaboration on both sides. Does that make sense?
Very nice answer. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, are we ready to go?
I think only one participant was written. He has a question. Should see who was that. Okay, I think you can continue, and if anyone has question at the end can ask. Thank you. Please continue. Thank you so much.
Okay, you can still hear me?
Yes.
And my video is off, so you cannot see me making all these faces.
Okay.
Right.
Continue.
Okay.
We love your face.
All right. So here we go. We're going to continue with the second part of this. This is nursing informatics. This is going to be infrastructures, applications, opportunities, and challenges. And I wanted to take a minute, and this is where I wanted to give you a little bit more detail about me. Because in the first lecture, all I told you is that I'm a nurse, I have a DNP, and I didn't explain my journey. So I started my registered nursing career with a 2-year degree. I started as an associate's degree. And I worked for 25 years before I considered going back to school. There were many things that happened in that time, but one of the main things that happened was the birth of nursing informatics. Every time I looked at advanced degrees in nursing, I did not find what I wanted. I knew I didn't want to be an administrator. That just was not appealing to me. I was pretty sure I didn't want to be a CRNA, certified registered nurse anesthetist. And I knew for sure that I didn't want to be in education. And I kind of laugh at that now. Nurse practitioner was not around at the time. There just was not a reason for me to go on in school. There was nothing there that I wanted. But early in my nursing career, I got picked for a computer assignment, and I loved that. I kept going back to computers, but nurses did not work in computers, not at that time. Then I found out that the ANA subspecialty for nursing informatics was there, and that was in 1994. And actually, I was about 3 years late on that. At the time, I was working in computers again. I also found out at that time that the ANCC offered a certification for nursing informatics, but the minimum education level was a bachelor's level, and I didn't have that. And that sort of made me mad, so I set a goal. But life happened. I was not able to go back to school until the online platform became available. I graduated with a master's degree in 2011 with a specialty in nursing informatics, and in 2014 with a doctorate. So I went from one program to another program without a break. And I still don't have that bachelor's degree, by the way. I bridged from associate's degree to master's degree. So what have I done as a nurse? Clinically, I've worked in medical telemetry units and in the emergency department, but I've also spent an awful lot of time as a nursing supervisor overseeing the entire hospital. Excuse me. Currently, I work for a major healthcare corporation in a clinical informatics role. And it's a hands-on level, but I've got a few goals that I'm achieving at this level. Up until a year ago, about the time that COVID started, I was still working a clinical job along with my full-time job. I was still a nursing supervisor. And for most of my clinical informatics career, I've worked a PRN clinical role at the same time. But I left the nursing supervisor position because the clinical informatics hours started to escalate because of the COVID demands. Now in informatics, I've built many different types of systems. I've built standalone systems, enterprise-wide systems. Major systems that I know are Meditech, Cerner, and McKesson is now known as Allscripts. I've also built, upgraded, deinstalled, redesigned, reviewed for compliance, all kinds of systems. Somewhere in there, I've done education for many of these systems. I've worked at the facility level, the market level, which are several facilities that work together and do a similar build. And I've worked as a corporate director level for facilities that work together across the country. I've also taught, and here's the funny part, remember me, the one that didn't want to be in education. I've taught at the university level in bachelor, master's, and doctorate programs. I've taught nursing care, the actual start an IV and do an assessment, nursing informatics, and then health administration programs. I've also written nursing coursework for nursing master's programs. Although publishing has not been a top priority, I have published a little and I plan to do a lot more of that in the future. Through all of this, I have had life events happen, both good and bad. What I would like to say to you today is to keep your eye focused on your dreams and work to get those dreams. Sometimes your steps are small, but keep taking those steps. So let's get going with this lecture. Make sure my screen's advanced. Well, I should have advanced and let you see that screen. Sorry. All right, so here's our objectives. We're going to identify some common hurdles in infrastructure and hardware. We're going to identify roles of process assessment related to infrastructure. We're going to identify the need for production and non-production environments. We're going to review system build processes. We're going to identify types of healthcare applications, identify challenges to nursing informatics, and identify opportunities for nursing informatics. So infrastructure can mean a lot of different things, but today I'm talking about the infrastructure that's within your facility. The infrastructure that you, as an informatics nurse or an informatics nurse specialist, might have to deal with. You really don't have much control over anything outside of your facility. You might get called upon to look at a room and assess what equipment needs would be. Are you in an old building or a new building? Old walls can sometimes be hard to work with. They're solid. You might not be able to get cables through. If you do have to do a cable run, is there electricity to power the devices that you're trying to, where you're trying to put them? New buildings are great, but do an assessment before they are built or while they're being built so that you know what the needs are. Is your network wired or wireless? A wireless network, especially if it's retrofitted, might need you to walk around with a technician during a survey. And I recently had to do this. First, I had to get the technician into places that he didn't have access to go or didn't know he needed to go. And then second, I had to let the staff know that it was okay for him to be in private areas of the facility. And then third, I knew the work process or knew how to ask what the work process was so that we could figure out what needed to be surveyed. And now let's talk about hardware, because that's always a continuing saga. We never have enough hardware. So please do a workflow process and see what the needs are. Please also make sure that the providers do not displace nurses in the space game. My current facility has been very good about providing equal room for nurses and providers to document. Don't let the providers push out the nurses. They still have to document. Wireless networks, if your facility is setting up one, please participate, even if you're not invited. Invite yourself, it's all right. Also, this is a great place to invite a staff nurse to participate. No one knows better where they like to stand, if they're going to be down the hall in a little cubby, in a room, in a storage room, in a workspace, let the staff nurses help. When it comes to hardware, ask the end user what they like. Do they like the carts on wheels? Do they want a laptop that's installed in a drop-down slider on the wall? Do they want to be in the patient room? All of this is a consideration. Look at your clinical areas, the nurses station, the medication stations. How about the lounge areas? How many of us document on breaks or at lunch? Wouldn't it be convenient to be able to document at the same time? What about patient areas? Are there bedside devices? Are they wall mounted? Do they face the patient? And is there privacy? These are all things to consider. Printers, do they work? Are they networked? When equipment gets changed out, how are they reprogrammed, if they're reprogrammed? And what's the difference between printers for the lab results and printers that you would print a schedule or a discharge documents on? And also map your clinical workflows. And you're going to hear me say this over and over and over. Know your clinical workflows. Follow clinical folks and watch how they work. It takes one to know one, and you are one. Also look at all shifts, all days, and by all days, I mean weekdays and weekends and holidays. When there is a change in other department workflows, take a minute to see how that affects nursing. So for example, if a department like maybe EKG decides to make a staffing cut, maybe second shift, how does nursing react to this? Well, nursing all of a sudden has to do their own EKGs, and that they're not going to get any more staff for that. So that's a workflow change for nursing as well. These are the things that you have to look for. Workflow mapping, and I cannot stress this enough. Look at your staff. How do they work? All shifts, all days, all holidays. I guarantee you your night shift is going to work differently than your day shift. Include the type of devices used and when they are used most or least. Ancillary departments somehow magically become your responsibility. Plus, they usually have interfaces that need to be managed at some point, and these become your responsibility. Look at who supports the infrastructure besides you. We can talk about business hours, but really if you are the sole person supporting your facility, what's your backup plan? If you want to have dinner with your family, you need a backup plan. I've got this one in red. What happens with unexpected downtime? Do you, that is the facility, have a plan? There should be a disaster plan, and I'll talk more on this later. My next point on here is to dream big. I need for you to project to a desired future state. What do you want? And by this, I mean always read what's coming around the corner, know what technology is being developed, because someday, and that might be sooner or later, you might be on an elevator with a CEO and be asked that question, what would you want? So have an answer ready. So let's look at process assessments. When it's time to do a process assessment, and by that I mean you're either looking at putting a new piece of software in or you're revamping a current piece of software, include everybody, all the stakeholders. Invite clinical areas, ancillary areas, business and financial people, plant operations, housekeeping, dietary, any area that could be influenced. You can always say thank you. You don't have to come back, or we'll invite you on an ad hoc basis when we need you. So here's a quick story for you. I worked with a hospital that was in my corporate days. They had a lean team that came in to reorganize an unorganized emergency department. They had the blessing of administration. They gave them a week. They mapped out their process workflows. They made changes. They invited the hospital to come view their newly revised ED after a week. Plant operations had been left out of the lean team process. At the big reveal, the plant operations manager stepped forward and congratulated the teams on a great job. And then he told them they were going to have to move all those carts, the code cart, the special procedures cart, the linen cart, back into the utility room because having them in the hall was a county and state code violation. So the lesson learned is invite all of your stakeholders. So let's talk about the electronic health record for a minute. Where does it live? You should have at a minimum 3 environments. You should have a production and 2 non-production environments for the electronic health record. The production or live environment is where the working environment that houses the current patient data and the working version of the EHR. In this environment, we do no testing and no introduction of untested code. It is protected. The non-production environment, and today we're simply going to call this test, non-production test, we've got to call it something, is the place that we're going to put new code and test it if we need to, when we need to. And if for some reason there's a break in the production environment, theoretically, it's going to also be broken in non-production test. So we would go to non-production test. We would look at that break. We would fix it. We'd take that fix code and we'd roll that up into production, and the fix would be in place. When we do major code upgrades, we put the major code upgrade in non-production test. We test it, we work with it, we can train with it, and then we move it into production. Now, a third non-production environment, and we're going to call this one train because we've got to call it something. This is the place that we're going to use to train new employees. This can also be used as a backup for break fix testing if we have to, in the instance that maybe in our non-production test environment, maybe we've got new code in there that we're already testing. So we've got, we can use train as our break fix testing. We're also training our users here, but this is our third work environment. So it's always nice to have more than 3 environments, but 3, the minimum is 3, and the environments should be kept current as soon as possible after upgrades. So when you have a code upgrade, the new code goes into test, non-prod test, it gets approved, it moves into prod, then test and prod are current, and train has to be upgraded to the new code as soon as possible so that all 3 environments are current. So we're leaving infrastructure and moving into applications. Most new products come with vendor-assisted installs, and the vendors want you to be successful because it makes them look good as well as making for happy customers. The amount of vendor assistance in contract is contract dependent. If your facility is part of a corporation that has a big information system support team, you may not need as much contractor intervention as a small facility that doesn't have that support. Vendors and or large corporation IT departments have a structured plan for building, testing, go live strategy. Large systems can take months to years for a ground up build to go live. The new system is built, tested, and trained in non-production environment, and then it's moved to production. Training strategy, go live support, go live strategy are all agreed upon at the beginning of the system build between the vendor, the facility steering committee, and those are mostly your financial and O people, and the project team. Stakeholder support, evaluation, and no changes will be talked about in a minute, but are important points that cannot be left out. And then from the beginning of the system build, you need to use a strategy of finding a nursing informatics committee from the start if you don't have one. So you should be evaluating the team that you're using as the project progresses for this committee. So let's talk about the training strategy. The vendor usually does a training of the facility to find core team trainers. This can be done on-site or off-site depending on the contract. And the vendor should also have training materials that can be adapted by the facility. The core team of trainers will then train the designated facility trainers. We call that train the trainers. And the trainers usually come out of staffing, and they can be people that are already building or testing and or super users. The trainers should come from all areas and all shifts because these trainers are going to go back to their shifts and their areas and be the go live support on their normal shifts. When training a facility for an implementation, Find training rooms, figure out how many people can fit in the rooms. And remember, we're in COVID time, so you have to consider social distancing, and find out how many people there are to be trained. How long are your classes going to be? 2 hours is a decent amount of time. 4 hours, sincerely, this gets hard to sit through. So you might need to think about dividing your classes up into class A and class B and put each user through 2 classes. Whatever you decide on, write a schedule. It's all about the math. Put your people through training. Do not train more than a month in advance. 2 weeks in advance is better. If you have to train that far out because of the numbers, then give the trained employees homework to do to keep their skills up. Go live support depends on the size of the facility, the complexity of the new system, and the end users. Providers tend to need more help than nurses and ancillary end users. It's a phenomenon I cannot explain, but they do need more help. Make sure all shifts, all days, again, weekdays and weekends, and holidays are covered until a complete schedule rotation has occurred. And what I mean by that is if you have maybe your schedules run weekend A, B, you'll need to run 2 weeks of support. If you run weekends A, B, and C, and your weekends, you have 3 different sets of people that work A, B, and C, then you'll need 3 weeks of coverage. Stakeholders, we want them to be making rounds during a go live, because when a CEO or a CNO walks out onto the floor and sees the staff working hard with a new product, and the staff sees them, it makes a great difference when they see the O team is making rounds and supporting them. So there's a couple of types of go lives, and this is determined in advance. A big bang go live takes a lot of support at first. But it's usually complete quicker, about 2 weeks, depending again on your schedule. But it also can create a bit of chaos, and this usually resolves quickly. A phased or staggered approach takes a longer time, but it's also less chaotic, and it also has some dependency on limited movement in the staff. So you might actually be still training during the go live, and it might limit you moving staff, floating staff from one area to another if that staff's not trained yet. Evaluation starts at the moment of go live. A running problem board should be posted in your communication rooms, war room, whatever you call it. A daily meeting should be held so all super users can be briefed on what works, what doesn't work, what's been happening. Little things can be fixed. If you find a misspelling on a screen, you can change that. You can adjust a multiple choice selection screen from radio buttons to multiple selection boxes if that's a problem. But what we don't change are process changes. 30 to 45 days, we need to hold the system steady unless there's a patient safety issue or a financial issue. Remember, we've been working on this, we've been planning it. Most of these changes that are asked for are because people say, I don't like this, or it doesn't work for me. What we're looking for is a behavior change rather than an adoption of a new process. And asking people to change a behavior is hard. So we want to keep this system in place for 30 to 45 days so that the behaviors can go away. Now, earlier I talked about looking at the staff of your team to form a nursing informatics committee. After your implementation is complete, there will be a need for an ongoing committee to address ideas, complaints, problems, changes. This should be the nursing informatics committee. Have a representation from your team that helped build, test, train, support the go live. Select people from all areas and all shifts. Meet monthly and make sure they get paid for this time. This isn't volunteer work. The Nursing Informatics Committee will be ready to jump into action the next time you have a code upgrade or you want to implement a new project. Always, always celebrate success. Take credit for the work that you do. Give credit for the work that is done. There's going to be meetings, many meetings. Always give public recognition when you can. It's great. It's nice to be recognized. Handwritten thank you notes are wonderful. And meal tickets are always nice because I like to eat. But a celebration does not have to be big or expensive. It just has to be sincere. Okay, so moving into applications that you might work with. There are 3 large software vendors in the United States, Epic, Cerner, and Meditech, and some would argue that Allscripts is a competitor. These are enterprise-wide EHRs, and that they're made up of many modules within the software, and some of these you're probably familiar with. They encompass admissions and registration, order entry, nursing documentation, physician documentation, emergency department, radiology, laboratory, pharmacy. And we've talked about some of these earlier. But these all work well together because they're under the same vendor. Outside of the facility, in a non-facility setting, you might also see provider office, software, clinics, pharmacies, telehealth. 2 of the vendors that we see in the United States are eClinicalWorks and Athena. Part of the goal with this is a health information exchange so that we can combine the electronic health record and share data. Right now, there are barriers that limit this from happening. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But many of these barriers are based in the proprietary software of the individual vendors. There's also privacy issues to consider. And then one more issue to consider is the issue of storage standards that have been that are out there. If I store data today, will we be able to recall it in 10 years? So some of the challenges that may come looking for you as an informatics nurse specialist or an informatics nurse, people are going to look at you with the expectation that you support all aspects of the computer. On a daily basis, I get calls for security access. Well, this is handled by a security department at my facility, not me. But I will go ahead and send the caller the correct forms to fill out because I've been asked for this so many times. And I get them pointed in the right direction, but it's really not my job or my responsibility. I also get calls to print operative notes that did not print. Well, I don't even have a printer, but I refer them on to the right department that does handle this. Yesterday, I got a call to set up a physician's home computer. I don't do that. I don't even know how to do that. I have enough time, a hard time with my own computer. But this is the kind of challenge that you will get, or as I call it, the squirrels that run in front of me, distracting me from what I really need to be doing. One of the things that I do and that you should do are upgrades, whether they're big or small. They may not seem to be in the task list for nursing informatics, but you need to pay attention and be involved in upgrades. Even if it doesn't look like there is a clinical implication, go to these meetings. On several occasions, I've gone to upgrades that were simply network upgrades and had, and I'm using my fingers for air quotes here, had no impact on the clinical user except they did. The upgrade would start and suddenly the documentation system went down. So when the upgrade starts, I always call the nursing supervisor and let him or her know that something's about to happen. Because who's going to get the first call when the documentation drops? The nursing supervisor. On these 2 occasions, the first time, well, both times we had to back out of the upgrade because it didn't work. The first time this happened, the clinical areas were down almost an hour. The network people kept saying, we've just about got it. We've just about got it. The second time I was a little quicker and we backed out after 20 minutes because we simply can't keep the clinical areas down. Nursing informatics has the voice to come on the call and tell the network people, you can't disrupt patient care this long. Don't be shy. You've got the voice. You can do this. Another area that you will encounter are the break fixes. I talked about this earlier. And these can be challenging, especially if the prod and non-prod domains environments are not kept current. But be diligent, ask questions, and use your resources. And by resources, think about your community of practice. These are your peers that you work with, maybe inside of your work environment. But also look around in who you're going to school with now and where they go. Maybe some of your internet friends, bulletin boards, if they're working within the same work environment, they may have an answer for you. So that becomes your community of practice. Don't be shy. Use your resources. Problem identification. This is a blessing and a barrier. But think about the bedside nurse. The bedside nurse is the nurse that identifies the problems. I think this is why I stayed in a clinical role as long as I did. Identifying a problem leads to the next step. And that step is evidence-based research and evidence-based practice. Pay attention to the clinical nurse when they identify an opportunity, because it truly can be an opportunity. So I want to slip back into a little bit broader view of the facility for a minute. There are different types of facilities and different types of clinical areas based on the size of the facility. Rural hospitals run different than urban hospitals. The staffing is different, the resources are different, the approach is different. One nurse may be working several areas in the same shift in a rural setting. As an informatics nurse specialist or an informatics nurse, you will probably work at a larger hospital and occasionally cover a rural hospital. Rural hospitals usually cannot include nursing informatics in their budget. If this is the case, you cover a rural hospital as a part-time, please keep them in mind when decisions are made. Access can be an issue. And this, I think I'm talking more about personal access. This can be rural, but it also happens in the urban area, and it can be financial or hardware issues. Culture becomes an issue at times. Sometimes cultures resist technology. Sometimes the resistance is simply by language. Income can be an issue. Many people depend on their phones and only their phones to access internet. And then generations can be a barrier. The older generation has simply been left behind with technology. And I give you my mother. We talked about her earlier, but she has no clue about electronics or how to maneuver within the internet. Okay, let's talk about that downtime disaster recovery plan that I had talked about earlier. It's important. Develop a plan if your facility does not have one. If there's a plan, check it to see if it includes a plan for information systems. Update that plan routinely and include all the stakeholders in this. Look at a variety of scenarios. In the time that I've lived in the Nashville area, we've had a flood and a bombing. No one expected the flood. The areas that were hit were not on a floodplain. There was not a disaster plan that included a flood scenario. The bomb happened on Christmas Day 2020, so about 2 months ago, and it took out 90% of the communication in the city of Nashville. Now, the hospital had a plan for dropped communications at the level of the hospital, but not the level of the Nashville region. Now they do. So plan for the unexpected disaster. Look at a variety of scenarios and practice the plan, all shifts, all days, and all roles. Opportunities for nursing informatics seem to be unlimited. You can work almost anywhere. There is a need. Facilities, home health, offices, project management, education, vendors, insurance, contract employment. Right now I'm working with, I think we've hired 4 contractors to help fill gaps. You can do product development. I think we talked about that earlier. You can do research. We know that we need policy and politics clinically to protect and help move health informatics along. There's legal aspect, institutional education, genetics and genomics is a big upcoming facet of informatics. the opportunities seem to expand on a daily basis. So stay current with national and international organizations and current events as to what is going and happening. So at this point in the slide presentation, I was going to ask for questions, but I did add just a little bit based on questions from last week. One of the questions was about COVID and what we had done in my hospital or in hospitals in general based on COVID. So let me talk just a little bit about that. With COVID, we ended up building multiple locations into every hospital that I work in. And we did this based on projections from the local emergency management system. And these were projections that gave us how many beds we thought we were going to need. My hospital is about 540 beds. So we added 17 potential units. And remember, these are units in Cerner. They're electronic units. Somebody else was actually physically building the units. But we took these areas and there were areas like waiting rooms, ambulance bays, walkway bridges, physician lounges, libraries, and we converted them in the test environment and with a pre-designated number of beds. We tested that area and then we moved them to prod and tested again. And the first time we did this, we actually paid a service fee to Cerner to create the units, because remember, I said it's all about the money. If you know, Cerner is our vendor. If we pay Cerner to host, I'm just making this up, we have 10 units with Cerner and now we want 12, we have to pay Cerner for 2 additional units. So we had to pay Cerner to create these extra units. Then the pandemic curve flattened and we deactivated the units. They were still there, we just couldn't see them. And then the pandemic started to surge again. The second time we did this, we simply had to reactivate those units. Cerner was not involved. When building the units and beds dictionaries, we have to reflect the type of patient that's going to be there, whether they're going to be inpatient, outpatient, observation, the type of bed, the type of payment, whether it's going to be, insurance type, and how it's going to be reported to the state. And then we also had some building to do in the lab module. And I think they had to build the most because they had to build tests for reference labs for the COVID. And then we eventually brought the testing into the in-house lab, so we had to rebuild. So we had to reflect the difference. Then we also had to build a lab test that wasn't reported that we would do for our patients that were discharged, but going to be discharged to a different facility, because we didn't want that lab report, that COVID test reported in our statistics. We were just doing that lab to make sure that the patient was safe to go to another facility. We also had to adjust our documentation, and this was almost a weekly exercise. So we added to the patient demographics bar, we added a display that if the patient was COVID positive or if the patient was under investigation, so that every time a caregiver signed in, they knew. We built a screening page that was asked at registration and triage. And we had significant questions that seemed to change on a daily basis that we would have to add and ask. And all these things are not unique to our ministry, but they're also built on a national level. So the teams that worked on this were working around the clock. Now, my team is a team of 8, and we divided weekends and took first and second call. So over the months of May, June, July, August, and probably into August, so 5 months, in a position that I had never been on call, I was on call every 4th weekend. Today, clinical informatics still runs all of the contact tracing reports based on names sent to us from infection prevention. Now, in fact, infection prevention does not have access to run these reports because security restrictions. So we still have that task to do. So that's what I added for COVID. And I will stop here and ask for questions.
Thank you so much. It was very precious presentation. First of all, I just want to ask you, let me say something or conclude my getting what I got, okay? About some questions. If I am wrong, please you correct me and tell me what's wrong. I think based on my study, previous study, and based on your presentation and answers to the audiences, a nurse can continue her study in Master of Science in each aspect of nursing, for example, pediatrics, NICU, geriatrics, or medical surgical, or nursing informatics, okay? Then when she become a nurse informatics, it is not compulsory to do programming, and it's not her job to do programming and develop software and hardware. Just if this nurse is interested, can go to a vendor company or corporation to prepare and do programming for design a system. Otherwise, if this nurse works in a hospital as a clinical nurse, will just learn based on competencies which expect from a nurse informatician. And the competencies last week, Professor Hebda talked about. And I also saw in the articles there were different ideas, and most of them, even in Tiger competencies, and they never accept that one of the nurses' duty is programming. They didn't accept that. But if a nurse is interested on programming, no problem, can go and do, for example, attend a classes for SQL or C++, and do programming. And this nurse, of course, can be a connection, a better connection between clinical nurse and IT man or the medical informatics specialist who do programming in the vendor side. And that was I got, and I think this is a good answer to the questions today. Some audiences had this question. And the other side of question was about ANCC. I just want to say that I know one NI boot camp from Dr. Susan Newbold. If someone wants to, can participate. And also there are many such classes which are competency based. And also in our country, in Iran, in Virtual University of Medical Sciences, which I am the Department of Nursing Informatics and Director, we developed in Persian the program for preparing them for ANCC. And we have 3 levels. We are trying to be competency-based. and I think they can search in the internet. And if Dr. Rose knows something more, please guide them, because they want to know how to participate, how to be ready for ANCC. Thank you. And if I am wrong, please correct it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The master's degree nursing informatics is not necessarily about programming. I am not a programmer. This head does not wrap itself around programming language, but I have friends that can program, and they have their own special little place. And that helps them. They go into the world of reporting, and because they're clinical nurses, they know where to go in and they can pull those reports. That helps them. But you don't have to do programming. That's just another little subspecialty inside of nursing informatics. So I believe you are correct in what you said. As far as Dr. Susan Newbold, I know her. She lives about 30 miles from me. And I just precepted an MSN student who just texted me this week, said that she's getting ready to go through Dr. Newbold's boot camp. So that's a great preparation for the ANCC.
Yes, I heard that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you and your friends, like Professor Hebda and Professor Saba, Virginia Saba, and Professor Sipes and Susan Newbold, and many of your friends. I saw your names, for example, 50 authors in a book. You are working together, and it's your success reason. So, and I think we should do work together. Nurses should work together. For example, we have many articles in Iran, and some nurses did a great job for developing CCC in some part of nursing, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But they are not together, and they are not usable just in a research and in an article.
Right.
Or maybe it is used only in some parts, very small part, and the others can't use it. I think we should go work together and try to use and benefit best practices to develop our nursing.
Your idea of collaboration is wonderful. And when I spoke about earlier, I think I was talking about the break fix aspect of it. I brought up the topic of community of practice. And that's one of the things that I believe in. You keep your resources together. You stay in touch with people. When you have a question, you reach out to someone in your community of practice and you ask. When you have a great example, you put that back out and say, hey, this is what I found. Actually, Dr. Hebda did that to me this week and said, I found this great lecture online. You might be able to want to stop in and take a peek at this. Thank you, Dr. Hebda, by the way. There was one other question that has come up, and I had a written answer of that. Someone asked, see if I can find it. Oh, about experience.
Yes.
Experience as opposed to the level of a master's degree informaticist. So I wanted to go back to that because I mentioned that we just hired 4 contractors, and it's an interesting conversation. We interviewed probably 9 different people, and the people that we hired, they're not all nursing informaticists. They don't have the MSN. And that's kind of a scale of what do you want. I will take someone that has 20 years of bachelor's degree experience, but working inside the system, as opposed to a master's degree and no experience. So it becomes a slippery slope. If you're a new grad nursing informaticist from a master's degree, you have to get experience somewhere. And so you just kind of attach yourself to someone and start getting experience. There's no recipe for it. You just have to go out and look for it.
Very nice, thank you.
Mhm.
And also Yakubu has a question, I think, and he raised his hand. Would you please host unmute Yakubu from Ghana? He was our previous student of
He,
Master of Science in Nursing.
he's back.
Yeah.
You're back.
Thank you, Dr. Rose. Thank you very much for this educative information. The question I want to ask has to do with the downtown or disaster recovery. Yeah, for us, like unlike disaster recovery, what specific downtown recovery do you think you would suggest for erratic power supply or internet system? Because for us in developing world, usually, like I told you, we have just been rolled onto an e-health or electronic record system in our hospital. And sometimes there are times we have erratic power supply, and the system goes off. Then if it is a time for you to probably administer a medication to a patient, then you are found wanting. So because of this, some of the nurses have started writing on sheets with respect to patient medications and due time for medications and stuff like that.
Okay.
So what specific downtime recovery would you recommend for situations like erratic power supply? Not necessarily disaster.
Okay, so you bring up a couple of good points. If you have an interrupted power supply, I'm guessing you might have a backup generator that would give you maybe a focused power source. So first, patient safety. You need to be able to generate your medication administration record so at least your nurses know what they're going to give. So there are systems where you can, you have a PC that will dedicate itself to having an 8-hour backup. So for every 8 hours or 12 hours, whatever you set it up to, it will recall the last documentation. So you can put that in place. On a bigger scale, you have to decide in your EHR what information you want to have tracked. Because if you're down for longer than that, you're going to have someone come in and possibly document or redocument what's been on paper. So you may elect to only put in vital signs or orders or something like that. What do you want to flow across in an uninterrupted way? Everything else might just be scanned, those pieces of paper scanned into the medical record.
Okay.
So those are decisions that you make, but there are lots and lots of disaster recovery programs now. 20 years ago, there wasn't, but those have evolved.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. There is another question in the chat box. If possible, please see to it. Dr. Rose, can you read the chat box, the last
If you are
message?
going to use a massive
Then we
data,
can have a poll and end the session, today's session. I think the question from Ahmed. Ahmed, question, and then Omar.
okay, Omed's up here. Okay, can I talk while they're doing the poll?
Yes.
Okay. So Omed, I don't know about how many countries are using the EHR. I'm sorry. I wish I could answer that for you, but I don't know. Which countries, I know when I do research, I look at the United States, I look at UK, Australia, and Japan. has a lot of information. So I would look in those directions. And I can't really speak to the international. Dr. Hebda and Dr. Sipes might be able to speak to that next week, but Dr. Hebda might have more information. Omar, let's see. If you're going to use a massive data from an EHR for the purpose of research, particularly retrospective data, what are the legal and ethical issues you need to do? Okay, first, legal and ethical, you wash all data so that it cannot be traced back to the patient. And when in the United States, you have to get consent, and the patient knows they either sign off on it or they don't. Does the system do it electronically? Yes. And have you, the question keeps moving. Have you got a direct communication with a discharged patient? Yes, we follow up on discharged patients because that's part of our Leapfrog initiative, in that we are trying to follow up with the patient. We don't want them to be readmitted. That's part of our incentivized payment. We don't want a readmission, so we always follow up and make sure the patient is doing well. Did that answer questions?
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful session with your very nice lecture. And I think there are so many questions, and we should invite you once more in another session and ask you if you have time. We have you in future again for a lecture.
Okay.
And answering the questions. Thank you so much. And I think if there is no any other question, please, dear participants, do answer the poll, and we can end the session after 2 minutes, please. Thank you. And special thanks to Dr. Rose, and also special thanks to the Professor Tony Hebda. If we can hear your voice, we will be so happy. We missed you, Professor Hebda. If dear host can unmute Professor Hebda, unfortunately, we don't have today Professor Sipes. I looked at the name of participants, but I couldn't find her. But we will have a great lecture from Professor Sipes next week on Monday. And about the countries, also I will speak next week on Monday, and we will see you all. And if Professor Hebda is able to speak, we will be happy for the last minute of this session hear her voice. Can you unmute Professor Hebda, dear host? Okay, I think she is not now in the participants. Okay, no problem.
I know that she had she was doing a TUMS presentation at some point today, so she may have had to drop for that.
Okay, and we are late now. This is
I'm sorry.
We are late because the session was until 9 p.m., but this is in Iran, Tehran time. It is 9:36. Okay, I think 1 minute more we can wait, because now 52% answered the poll, and we can wait for 1 minute more and then close the poll and say goodbye.
Okay.
Good night and good morning.
Good night
And thank you all participants who stayed with us, especially some of them who in their country it's midnight.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, it shows that they are so interested and they enjoyed your lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. This is 59% voted, and I think it's enough. We can close the poll, dear host. And thank you so much. And also, okay. Also, if Dr. Azadi, you want to say something, we can say goodbye, and I say goodbye to all. Thank you, Dr. Rose.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Now, I just want to thank Dr. Rose and everybody who participated in this session. It was really informative, and that was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and bye. We'll see you next week on Monday. Thank you so much. Okay.